What if we had an artifact that waited centuries to be examined by scientists, and yet which seemingly set out in 3D the passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ? We're talking the Turin Shroud here on Things Visible and Invisible. Russ Breault has been researching and lecturing on the mysterious Shroud of Turin for over 25 years. He founded the Shroud of Turin Education Project, Inc., and is considered one of the world's leading authorities on the subject, appearing on numerous televised documentaries airing on History Channel, Discovery Channel, and CBS. And he joins me down the line from his home in Atlanta. Russ, welcome to Things Visible and Invisible.
Well, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
Russ, from my researches, it appears that the Turin Shroud didn't really appear in history until about the 1350s. Certainly that's when it was first documented. As well as that, in 1988, as you well know, there was a carbon dating of this fabric. And, well, I'm sure you know that the outcome of that from very esteemed scientists was that it was a medieval piece of cloth, and therefore a medieval forgery. In fact, I think it was forgery that they wrote on the chalkboard back in 1988 in this very city. That is case closed, surely.
Well, you would think so, but things are not as they always seem.
Good.
And it's it is correct to say that the shroud has a documented history when it first appeared in France in 1356 as property of Geoffrey de Charnay, who was a valorous knight of the realm, and however, there is very clear documentary evidence to show that the shroud was in Constantinople in 1204. Stolen by the French during the Fourth Crusade. It goes underground for a while because there was an edict of excommunication put on anyone who stole relics from Constantinople, and then gradually reappears about 150 years later. It's safe to exhibit it now, and it's interesting that that when Geoffrey de Charnay got permission to exhibit the shroud in his church that he built in Loret, France, he had to get permission from the Pope, and the Pope basically said, "You can display it, but you cannot reveal where it came from." And that, of course, was Constantinople, because if they reveal where it came from, then they'd have to return it to Constantinople. And it's so there's a clear historical trail that dates it, with various historical references all the way back to the 3rd century. And it's to say that the trail only begins in the mid 1300s is really kind of ignoring all the rest of the data.
Okay, but you will be aware that the Turin Shroud, leaving aside any kind of religious beliefs around it or what the church has said about it over the centuries, there is a kind of debate around the Turin Shroud, which is purely scientific. Would you agree, Russ?
Yeah, it's the most analyzed artifact in the world.
Correct. And both sides are pretty trenchant in their views, if I can put it like that, one way or t'other, suggesting that it is a forgery, a medieval forgery, clearly so, and the carbon dating has completed that course of study, whereas others say, wait a minute, that carbon dating was somehow flawed. Talk me through your sort of misgivings about what happened in 1988.
Well, let me back up a minute, because when we say that it's a forgery, that's just kind of an allegation, because it was one of the clear results of the 1978 project of 33 American scientists who had permission to access to this cloth for 120 hours round the clock. And their results were inevitably published in 24 different peer-reviewed journal articles. So it's top flight science. And let's look at the results of that project first. Is that they clearly, they were just looking at how did this image come to be, and is the blood? Well, in fact, there's no visible trace of any kind of paint, ink, dye, pigmentation, or stain. There are no artistic substances on the cloth to account for the image. So they rendered a verdict basically saying, we don't know what it is, but it's not the result of an artist. And so to say that it's clearly a forgery is really a misnomer. It's the belief that, and we're going to talk about carbon dating in a minute, but if it did originate in the Middle Ages, well, obviously it can't be the Shroud of Christ, therefore must be a forgery, and yet there's no evidence to suggest that it is a forgery, and because you have a whole pattern of bloodstains that correlate with the wounds of crucifixion, because you can obviously say, well, okay, maybe there was a man in the shroud. How do you know it's Jesus? Well, then that's when you do a forensic analysis and you look at the crown, 30 puncture wounds around the head from an apparent crown of thorns, scourging all over the body, nail wounds in the wrist, nail wounds in the feet, wound in the side. Everything seems to correlate with the gospel account of what happened to Jesus. So, it would seem to suggest then that if there was a man wrapped in this shroud, that it was most likely Jesus, especially since there's no stains of decomposition. So in other words, if there was a body in this cloth, it wasn't in there for very long. So now we're back to the carbon dating issue, and yeah, it was carbon dated by 3 different carbon dating labs. They unfortunately, at the guidance of the church, they decided to cut one sample from the outside corner edge, exactly where it had been held and handled hundreds of times. I've got all kinds of etchings to show this. It would be between 1418 and 1694. It was exhibited outside every year, annually, and on May 4th was the official feast day of the Holy Shroud, and they build a platform, and you'd have clerics were physically holding the cloth up by their hands, 6 across on the platform, holding it exactly at that corner over 275 times. That documented. So if you were looking for the worst possible sample location, well, then of course, cut from one of those 2 outside corners would have been held and handled the maximum amount. So
just on that, Russ, because that's a really interesting point. But surely the people who were carrying out this scientific inquiry, they would have known this too, right?
Well, you would think, but apparently they didn't care. Because it all devolved to a issue of aesthetics. Is they cut it, they cut that corner because that's where that corner had previously been cut in 1973 for textile analysis, and it had also been cut earlier in the 1500s. So let's just keep all that stuff into one corner, and so it would look nice and neat and pristine, and wouldn't so unfortunately, when you have the most significant carbon dating event of the 20th century now hanging on one sample that was determined based on aesthetics as opposed to getting a reasonable sampling of different areas of the shroud that could be compared to one another. Now we have one sample cut into 3 sections, and like 5th graders know that that's not the same as cutting 3 different samples. And it's so you had a terrible breach of the sampling methodology. You had a terrible location for the sample to begin with. And now enter Ray Rogers, a thermal chemist with the Los Alamos National Laboratory. He begins to look at some spectrographic data from that corner that suggested that it was not chemically consistent with the rest of the shroud. And so he obtains a thread sample from the middle of the reserve sample. The reserve sample was part of the same sample that was carbon dated, but it was cut, but was held back in reserve and not carbon dated. And so he obtained a thread sample from the middle of that reserve sample and compared it with a thread from the main body of the shroud. And lo and behold, they're not the same. And so what do we got here? And so he finds the presence of cotton mixed in with that corner. There's no cotton anywhere else on the shroud, but there's cotton in that corner. There's some kind of a madder, that's MADDER, some kind of a madder root dye in that corner to perhaps blend in the new, brighter, newer cotton threads. And there's the presence of starch to stiffen the threads to affect some kind of repair. There's even a clear splice where the cotton and the flax threads were spliced into each other. So it seems that we have all the ingredients for some kind of a medieval repair, but with only one sample, and there's nothing else to compare it with, and so and now the latest you probably saw circulating in the news the past year or two, this new dating technology called wide-angle X-ray scattering, which measures the amount of natural aging found in fibers, and by measuring the amount of natural aging, they determined that fibers from the shroud show far more aging for it only to be 700 years old, as the Carbon Lab said. And in fact, it best compares with fabric found in Masada, Israel, circa first century. So now it's like, well, who's right and who's wrong? And it's this dating is quite spurious. It's just it's a sad chapter, because this should have been it should have been done right, but it wasn't.
I mean, it's very interesting what you're saying, Russ. I mean, do you actually think that there was an agenda here on the part of the scientists involved?
I can't speak to an agenda. I mean, who knows? It's the there's what's that show, old radio show? Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? I don't know. It's all I know is that from a scientific standpoint, it was not very rigorous. It was, bad sample equals bad data, and so the problem is, with only one sample, we don't know what we're working with.
Okay, so if we take it that the 1988 carbon dating is flawed, and a lot of people are coming to that conclusion, it still doesn't detract from the mystery around the Turin Shroud. As you said, it's the most analyzed artifact we have in the world. You could argue it's also the most mysterious. So again, using science rather than anything else, where would you start with the skeptic when it comes to the Turin Shroud?
Well, what I always come back to what I call the either or proposition. And that is, it either is the authentic burial shroud of Jesus, or it's not. And if it's not, then what is it? If it's not, well, then it must be the work of human effort, somehow, some way, either as a result of some kind of a devotional art or some kind of purposeful fraud. Either way, there has to be some method that this alleged artist used to create this image. We haven't found it. It's and like I said, one of the most intriguing attributes of the shroud, if you were to Google it or look at a picture of it somewhere, the first thing you see, it was in a fire in 1532. It's got all these burns all over it that look like parallel lines. The image is in between these two parallel lines, which are nothing more than burns, patches, and scorch marks. Then it was doused with water. You got a pattern of water stains on there. And of course, you have blood stains. If you flip the cloth over, you'll see the burns, you'll see the water stains, you'll see the blood stains, but you will not see the image of the man. The image of the man is a purely superficial phenomenon affecting only the top 1 to 2 microfibers, not threads, microfibers. Each individual thread is made up of about 200 microfibers. So that means that this image resides on about 1% of a single thread wherever the image exists. And and it's astonishingly superficial. And to wit, if you see the shroud for yourself, it's very faint. If you get closer than 6 feet, it disappears. You can't see it. You can see the bloodstains, but you can't see the image. You have to step back. And so what kind of artistic process is this? Because any other artwork, the closer you get, the more detail you're going to see. You're going to see the brushstrokes and the different colors and the different densities of the substances. That's not seen on the shroud. So it's clearly not the work of an artist. And if it's a hoax, it's an incredible hoax, because it's a hoax that has us baffled even now in the 21st century. And as for it possibility of it being authentic, one of the things that's really intriguing is that you have a whole pattern of bloodstains, but there's no image under the blood. If there's no image under the blood, then that tells you the order of events. Then that tells you that the blood was on the cloth first, followed by the image. Well, that kind of makes sense if it's authentic, because you got Good Friday followed by Easter Sunday, but it makes no sense if it's the work of an artist. And no artist would, in their right mind, would even try to craft a pattern of blood stains and wounds and then try to figure out the image. They would do the exact opposite. So there are many intriguing things that just make you wonder, say, how is this the work of any human effort?
I know over the years there's been attempts by often television companies to try to recreate the Turin Shroud. Have any of them come anywhere near in terms of the complexity of what you're describing?
I mean, they can mimic aspects of it, but no one has replicated a complete shroud image as we see on the Shroud of Turin. So the answer is no, they haven't, and none of them have tackled that one attribute of having the pattern of bloodstains first, followed by the image. None of them have even attempted to do that. The so it's like I say, it just remains this astonishing mystery. And now the advent of artificial intelligence, you've probably seen some of the pictures circulate about what Jesus looks like based on, as AI has interpreted the image from the shroud. It's really quite compelling. The so I just think it's to me it's all about possibility. What if this cloth is authentic? What does it mean then? And so, yeah.
Russ, the word possibility is a very interesting one, but what if the possibility is that simply we have an ancient artifact, a first century burial shroud of a man who was unfortunately crucified and nothing more? But you, I suggest, probably think it is something more, right?
Well, as I mean, if this was the burial shroud of Julius Caesar, no one would care. No one would be even interested in it. But the fact that it remains possible, very possible, that this is the burial shroud of Jesus, then the theological implications are inescapable. I mean, who is Jesus? He purports to be the very Son of God, who came to die in our place, who rose again from the dead to defeat the power of death. I mean, that's pretty significant stuff. I mean, I mean, this is what so this is why the possibility is so enormous. And of course, you have people lined up on both sides. You have the pro-authenticists. There's a word for that, but the which I would have to consider myself one of those that believes that the shroud is probably authentic. But then you have others that line up on the other side and say, no way, it's not authentic. But then you have to kind of dissect that and try to understand the motivation for various viewpoints. I mean, is it strictly a kind of a dispassionate scientific view, or is it based on a a world view? I mean, so if you're coming at the shroud from the world view that that there is no God, that we're all here just as a random chance, culmination of several trillion perfectly timed accidents of chance, well, then obviously the shroud cannot be authentic, period. I mean, so in spite of any evidence that would point in that direction. And so you really have to, assess, what your worldview is, and then kind of go from there. So for me, with the shroud, the notion of the shroud being likely authentic, it doesn't pose a problem with my worldview. So, but it does pose a problem with others. I will admit that.
Do you not think it's curious? I mean, if we had an artifact, a piece of cloth that could be dated back to the first century and had bloodstains on it and various pollen, I believe, from the Holy Land, etc., etc. The weave is from the first century. There's lots and lots of things that are of interest in the actual fabric itself. However, something happened in the 1890s, precisely at the peak of the photographic craze that was sweeping across certainly Western Europe at the time. And that was that the camera was the cutting edge technology. Okay, it was like smartphones are today or whatever it is today. And in the middle of that, a whole new dimension around the Shroud of Turin opens up. Talk to me a little bit about what happened in that photographic session in the 1890s in Turin.
Yeah, in 1898, it was photographed for the very first time, and an amateur photographer by the name of Secondo Pia, and as good he has this big box camera. Oh, this ancient thing, and he was his first attempt failed. The second attempt, he successfully was able to get a couple images, and in the old times, you had this big photographic plate, literally about a foot square, and he's soaking it in the developer solution and pulling it out, and all of a sudden, he notices that the image that emerges in on the photo negative is literally lifelike. I mean, it comes to life in the photo negative. I mean, it's much more clear, much clearer, much more pronounced. And of course, I mean, he in his story, he tells he almost falls out the window of his apartment. He was so stunned by what he saw. And of course, now this discovery was initially dismissed as being some kind of chicanery or hoax or something. And then it was photographed again in 1931, this time by a professional photographer. His name was Giuseppe Henri. And now he's using much better technology, much better film, much better cameras. And this photo negative phenomenon was confirmed. And at that point, then it goes worldwide. It gets circulated on magazines and newspapers and all around the world. And so it really is the technology of photography that kind of got the whole world energized about the shroud, and most importantly, got these scientific aspects came to fore. And first, with medical specialists, you had several medical doctors trying to assess, from looking at life-size photographic reprints of the shroud. Could this be the image of a real human being who died from these wounds? And then, probably the book that really launched it into the realm of modern scientific inquiry was a book published in, I think, 1950 by Dr. Pierre Barbet. It's called A Doctor at Calvary, and suggesting that the image appears to be anatomically accurate. And then you get blood chemists involved, and you get other people. And then, of course, we talked about earlier how you had this whole team of scientists analyze it in 1978, hands-on for 5 days, 120 hours round the clock. And hence it becomes, starting in 1898 when it was first photographed, until now it's the most analyzed artifact in the world. And the thing is that it remains an unsolved mystery. Now, that to me is really kind of preposterous. That how is it that we can't figure this thing out? I mean, if this was the work of some artist in whatever technique he used, we should be able to determine that. And yet we can't.
Yeah, I find it really fascinating the way in which the Shroud of Turin has kind of emerged from the medieval period with very little history before for a lot of people. I know you've talked about that recent researchers have shown that there is, but it sort of emerges into the medieval era. But it emerges again and again at different epochs, different moments. So, for example, as you say, in the end of the 19th century, it appears in a photographic evidence. And then I know the research is done in the 1970s involved people like NASA, for example. And we're using all sorts of the cutting edge technology to, as you say, to get to grips with this piece of material, to try and make sense of it, to try and work it out. Do you not find that that in itself is kind of part of the mystery, in which it's a mystery which keeps opening up? It's a mystery which it's not a mystery we're going to be able to close down at any point. Do you agree?
Oh, yes, I totally agree because, as we mentioned earlier, with the advent of artificial intelligence, it seems that technology keeps advancing the shroud into the next realm of investigation. It's curious how technology and science has yet to dismiss the shroud. And we talked about carbon dating and how carbon dating, I'm sure, is a valid science, but it's only as good as the sample you take. And so if you take a sample from the worst possible location on the shroud, then what do you have? So I mean, I think science will continue to explore the shroud and continue to be baffled by it.
Do you think as well there's also something, the 19th century was a time when the Bible, for example, was undermined by the higher biblical criticism. And also you had the rise of Darwinism, which undermined the creation story. Suddenly people of faith seemed to be anti-science or on the back foot when it came to science. And then you have this rather mysterious emergence into science of something from ancient times, maybe.
Well, yeah, I think things have been challenged pretty dramatically. I mean, you have the whole Darwinian thing, and now with the advent of modern genetics and information technology, I mean, can we really believe that our DNA is packed with 3.3 billion lines of genetic code all by itself, just through some random process? I mean, obviously, a lot of people believe that, but I can't get my head around that. So a lot of things that were quite challenging to faith in the early 1900s, late 1800s, are now shifting back in the opposite the direction. Because again, the and I think the fact that the shroud speaks to this central point in humanity. I mean, you have to ask a question. Who is Jesus, and is it and it did when corollary to the question of, is the shroud authentic? It takes you inevitably to the theological question: is Jesus himself authentic? I mean, is he really the Son of God? Did he really come to die in our place through crucifixion, the most horrific possible methods of execution? And did he leave his linen shroud in the tomb post resurrection for a reason? I mean, so yeah, when you were mentioning how the shroud has instructed in various times in history. You know, when the shroud is first revealed in Western Europe in 1356, it's property of Geoffrey de Charnay. That's only 4 years after the Black Death killed half the population of Europe. I mean, so the shroud emerging at that time gave great hope and comfort an embattled population that had been decimated. And it's you take it earlier into the history when it was kind of revealed in ancient Edessa. It becomes known that this is around the 6th century. It becomes known as the true likeness of Christ, not made by human hands. And from that discovery on, all of your icon images of Jesus changed to show long hair, full beard, large hollow eyes, long flattened nose, stylistically exactly like what we see on the shroud. And what were we fighting then? They were fighting, Gnosticism and all this stuff that said no, Jesus didn't really come in the flesh. And it's almost like the shroud emerges in the 6th century saying, oh yes, he did, and this is what he looked like. And it's so I mean, you're right, it seemed to pop up at very important times in history. And then, of course, 1898 is at the beginning of the scientific age.
That's right. Well, we've talked a lot about the past and the history of the shroud. What about the future, Russ? What are we looking at? Are we looking at another carbon dating at some point in the near future, do you reckon?
I don't think so. I think if there may be some more tests, but to be honest with you, I think the position of the Catholic Church at this point, it would be to say we have enough information. We may not have all the information, but we have enough, and to not make it an object of scientific inquiry, but rather an object of veneration and devotion. And it's kind of up to you. If you don't believe it's authentic, then that's fine. But if you do, that's fine too. And so it almost at this point, I think the shroud, is gonna be it has its own individual meaning to each person. And so I like to say that the shroud speaks to every level. A 5-year-old who can't even read can look at the shroud and say, "Look, mommy, look, daddy, there's Jesus." And then the teenager who can get caught up or in all the science. And I was on a History Channel documentary, and the first thing you hear on the documentary is me saying, "Is it possible that this ancient linen cloth captured the greatest paranormal event of all time?" And that's kind of cool. And it's and then of course, you can, in terms of theology or history or science, you can take it as deep as far as you want to go. So it really does speak to every level. And so you do have to wonder, in the gospel narratives in John chapter 20, verses 1 through 9, and Peter and John run to the tomb. Peter goes in first, sees the linen cloth lying there. Then John goes in, sees the linen cloth lying there, and believes. Believes what? Well, believes in the resurrection. That's what the rumor was. A rumor that Jesus himself started, that he was going to be crucified, and on the third day he would rise again. So when John goes into the tomb and sees the empty cloth lying there on the flat stone slab of the tomb, he knew what happened. And so the question then becomes, was that linen cloth left in the tomb only for the benefit of Peter and John? Or is it for the benefit of the whole world throughout all generations, speaking to the doubting Thomases of our age?
Wonderful. Russ, tell people where they can find out more about you and the various work that you're involved in.
Well, my website is shroudencounter.com, and I'm on the same title, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And I wrote a book last year. I'll plug my title, Shroud Encounter: Explore the World's Greatest Unsolved Mystery. And you can pick that up on Amazon, or you can on my website. But it'd be better to go to Amazon. I don't ship outside the U.S., so it's too complicated. It costs too much money. I don't want to fool with it. But you can order it off Amazon. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Russ, thank you for coming on Things Visible and Invisible, and I'm sure we will meet again.
I sure hope so. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of Things Visible and Invisible. We're dedicated to uncovering phenomena that challenge our understanding of reality, from ancient enigmas and paranormal encounters to scientific anomalies and forgotten histories. If you enjoyed this journey into the mysterious and unexplained, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting the notification bell to stay updated on future explorations. Have a personal experience or story that aligns with our investigations? We'd love to hear from you. Visit our website at tvi.show and reach out through our contact form. While we can't feature every submission, we review them all, and your story might be featured in an upcoming episode. To support our continued investigations, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter or channel member. Your contributions make these explorations possible and give you access to exclusive content, early releases, and monthly behind-the-scenes discussions with our team. Don't forget to check out our merch store. We've got everything from TVI-branded t-shirts and hoodies to stickers and coffee mugs, perfect for showing your support while keeping the mysteries close. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time as we continue to explore the things visible and invisible.